Now we're going to move to women's health.
Another pretty heavy one.
Another heavy one. I won't give you a long testimony on this one, though. All right, so changes in both House and Senate bills. Now, before I give you the stats here, I do want to talk about the Hyde Amendment. A lot of conversations that are swirling around are that this particular provision in the bill is because federal dollars should not be used to fund abortions. However, it doesn't do that. The Hyde Amendment already bans federal dollars from funding abortions. Um, so when we look at this provision at House Section 44-126, this is not for the prevention of abortions being funded by federal dollars. This specifically talks about defunding clinics that are providing other services. So I just want to start out by saying that. So House Section 44-126 prohibits federal Medicaid payments to nonprofit healthcare providers, which receives more than $1 million in Medicaid funds, primarily provides family planning or reproductive services, or performs abortions beyond the cases of rape, incest, or the life of the mother. Planned Parenthood clinics would likely lose all Medicaid funding for services, including contraception, cancer screenings, STD testings, pregnancy care, etc. I mean, over 2.5 million women would lose their primary health provider, and it would increase our deficit by $300 million over 10 years. And yeah, I will also say, 19 years old, I definitely used Planned Parenthood to find out I was pregnant. So, and then afterwards I used them to get all of the contraceptions, all the contraceptives I needed. Holy cow. All right, so let's talk about what Planned Parenthood does. This also exhibits the multiplier effect, by the way. So I want you to take a look at this wheel on the left side, or this pie chart, I guess. It's been a minute since I've been in like 8th grade math. That took a second. Let's look at that chart. So you're going to see STD testing and treatment is literally half of it. It's 50.7%. Contraception is 24.6. That's the orange. The green is 3.6%. It's UTIs, primary care, etc. The blue is your cancer screenings. That's 5.1%. And that purple, it's a really pretty shade of purple, is your preventative care, your prenatal, and miscarriage care. That's 11.7%. I want you to take a look at that tiny little sliver, that yellow sliver over there, 4.3%. That is how many abortions Planned Parenthood does. 4.3%. 95% of Planned Parenthood services are for non-abortive health care. I also want to add that there have been many studies done, and around 76% of the public supports what Planned Parenthood does outside of abortions. They support Planned Parenthood clinics for being used for those other purposes, and you'll see that's 95%. So let's go back to that multiplier effect. For every federal dollar spent on Planned Parenthood services, the government saves $7.09. 32% of women and 11% of men have used Planned Parenthood for services. The presence of clinics decreases the number of abortions due to the availability of contraception. It's very similar to the Medicaid and the SNAP examples that we were talking about. If we're able to provide a teenager with a condom, we save a lot more money by not having to pay for pregnancy care and postpartum care, and then all of the necessities she'll need after she gives birth.
Because when people are able to control when they have children, then they're less reliant on social services.
Absolutely. We can be more effective when we have a choice in how we go about our day to day, and having the ability to find out if you have an STD from sexual activity before you get it can help with prevention of later accumulation of disease. It can also help with ensuring that you get the treatment right away so you don't have negative health implications down the road. It's the same thing with, the preventative care, prenatal, miscarriage care, being able to find out, how not to be pregnant and what to do if you do get pregnant. That is that multiplier effect that determines how you're able to move forward in a healthy way.